girls. And after that, she moved to Dehradun, where she was teaching at Welham Girls' School, and she retired from Welham Girls' School as the vice principal. After retirement, Doita ma'am has gone back to doing what I think is her first love, and that is teaching. She loves teaching, that is her passion, and it's hard to decide whether she is a more brilliant teacher of English or history or both. And her immense knowledge is something that completely leaves us in awe every time you even have a conversation with her. Little wonder that Doita ma'am twice over was the BBC mastermind.
Once,
There
once.
is there is no topic on which Doita ma'am cannot hold you, can hold a conversation with you, which is deep, which is meaningful. She's an avid traveler. She's a bird watcher. Uh, I don't know what other, and of course, I think all the time that she has, she spends reading. She is a great, great reader. So, if we speak about Doita ma'am, I think the whole 1 hour that we have will get taken up by that. So, Doita ma'am, I won't stand between you and the students and my colleagues today. So, it's over to you, and thank you so much
Thank
for
you for
a big.
having
And
me.
oh, I think I left out the fact that currently Doita ma'am is teaching at the Assam Valley School.
Yeah.
We envy the beautiful green campus that she is in,
Oh, super.
and so she is actually addressing us from the campus of the Assam Valley School. So, Doita ma'am, it's over to you. And
Thank you.
once again, my sincere thanks for accepting this
Thank you, Amita.
invitation.
Thank you. Thank you again. Right. Um, Students, never believe what all you've been said. Right. Mrs. Amita Prasad, Ms. Priyadarshini Guha, teachers, and most of all, can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Most of all, students of Indus Valley School from Assam Valley School. Right. Good morning, or should I say shalom or salam alaikum? For both mean peace be upon you. It is ironic that I begin my address to you using the greetings of two great world religions who are now at war with each other. Both come from the same root in the Semitic languages. I'm honored that you have requested me to address you this morning, though I really can't figure out why. Don't listen to what Mrs. Amita Prasad said, because I'm nothing beyond 4 decades of teaching experience. And for most of you, I probably started teaching when your parents were children, right? I know this talk is compulsory for you. And I know that some of you are going to be thinking, oh God, she's going to go on about Mahatma Gandhi and all that stuff. Well, let's see how far I can get without mentioning him. Or is it possible to do that at all? I've been asked to address you on the occasion of International Day of Peace. And I must say that this is the first time I have actually known of a school choosing to commemorate this day. This shows the commitment to peace education, which most schools profess, but few actually implement. The United Nations General Assembly, as Mrs. Prasad told you, declared this as a day of strengthening the ideals of peace by observing 24 hours of non-violence and ceasefire. Now, I must say, I find this a bit odd. For 24 hours, one stops making war, and once the period is over, you again commence killing each other. It reminds me of the very famous Christmas truce of 1914 on the Western Front during World War I. For a few days, the British and German soldiers exchanged greetings and gifts over the trenches, and then went back to slaughtering each other. As a teacher of history, I have a long view of progress, or perhaps the lack of it, and I've lived through troubled times. So today, Instead of providing answers, I want to raise a few questions. What is peace? Is it the absence of war? Or, as the Latin writer Renatius wrote in the 4th or 5th century, if you want peace, then prepare for war. At first glance, this seems very sensible. Conditions of peace are preserved by a readiness to go to war if and when it becomes necessary. But is this peace? In 1914, after the longest period of pan-European peace, Europe marched into a conflict that killed millions, destroyed economies, and was the end of 3 empires. I refer, of course, to the First World War. That long peace, as Margaret Macmillan, the great historian of this period, has phrased it, was filled with preparations for war as the nations of Europe built huge armies and navies. And you students know that the arms race is often cited as a cause of World War I. These armaments were intended to produce a sense of security. They did just the opposite. They created a sense of fear and insecurity as countries competed with each other to build bigger armies and navies. And there was always the temptation to use them, which is what happened in 1914. And the 20 years peace that followed was ended by an even more destructive war, World War II. During those 20 years, there may have been an absence of conflict, but the rise of fascism and Nazism, with their glorification of war, meant that this was not peace in any real sense of the term. In fact, some historians have called it a 20-year truce between wars. When I began teaching way back in 1977, there was one conflict which I taught as an ongoing conflict that both Ms. Prasad and Ms. Gua, as teachers of history, will understand what I'm referring to. Something one assumed would go on forever, something like India-Pakistan, and that was the Cold War. For 70 years, this worldwide conflict prevented an outbreak of World War III. But how? Through the presence of the most destructive weapons the minds of men, and I have to say, they were mostly men, could devise. A litany of deadly initials. A-bomb, H-bomb, ICBM, SLBM, MIRV. Do you know what these initials mean? A-bomb and H-bomb, I'm sure you know. ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. SLBM, Submarine Launched Ballistic Missile. MIRV, even more deadly. A weapon with multiple warheads, multiple independent re-entry vehicle. In 1962, and I am old enough to remember this, the world nearly came to the brink of nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 7 days, the world watched in fear as what would happen. At the last minute, the two leaders, Kennedy and Khrushchev, pulled back and the world heaved a sigh of relief. But what if things had gone the other way? Right? Just a moment. Right. Hello? Thank you. I'm on a class now, okay? Can I get back to it? Okay. So this was, and you'll be surprised that this war, this threat of war, took place at a time when we also went to war. The Indo-Chinese War took place at exactly the same time, October 1962. Some of you may like to look him up. A crazy poet and mathematician called Tom Lehrer. He even got some black humor out of this situation. And he wrote this poem, which I think is quite crazy but appropriate. He said, "We will all go together when we go, every Hottentot and every Eskimo. When the air becomes Uranus, we will all go simultaneous. Yes, we all will go together when we go." Yes, we achieved peace during the Cold War, but it was at the cost of what came to be known as MAD, mutually assured destruction. In 1989, I rejoiced with others as one by one, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and the little states of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia threw off the stifling dictatorship of the Soviet Union entirely peacefully. It was symbolized by that iconic photograph of Berliners breaking down the hated wall that had separated them from each other. The Soviet Union collapsed, and at Malta, George Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev declared that the Cold War was over. We hoped for a new era of peace. What did we get? A civil war that tore Yugoslavia apart so that it returned back to the Balkan states of pre-World War I. An aggressive Russia that attacked its former states of Georgia and Ukraine. A fresh wave of Indo-Pakistan conflict over Kargil. An increasingly aggressive China that is now muscling into the Indian Ocean, aggressively grabbing lands in the Asia-Pacific region. And I don't think I need to tell you what's been happening on our Ladakh border over the last few days. So, is this peace? It's true, there is no major war. It seems that there has never been a time when mankind is free of war. Even in times of so-called peace, there are sporadic and minor conflicts going on all the time. For example, in the era which we think of as the European peace between the Crimean War of 1865 and the outbreak of war in 1914, there was a terrible war in Africa, the Boer War, for instance, right? Even during the long peace or the deadly peace of the Cold War, we had the Vietnam War and the Korean War. And I am old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and I certainly remember going on marches and signing all sorts of declarations against the Vietnam War, right? And here I think our state government in Bengal showed a sense of humor when they named the street on which the American consulate stands as Ho Chi Minh Shorani. One doesn't associate the communists with humor, but someone must have had a sense of humor there or a sense of the ironic. So even in times of peace, there are wars going on. So perhaps we have to look for peace within society. But is this possible? Is this feasible? Does this mean we have to agree about everything? Is dissent possible? Does peace mean uniformity? Dictatorships would certainly like to think so. By enforcing a sort of conformity on its people, Dictatorships like the Soviet Union and Communist China certainly maintained stability. But was it peace? Why was the breakup of the Soviet Union quite so chaotic? And why does China have concentration camps for those who are considered dangerous to the state and the state idea of uniformity and conformity? Yet, when one visits China, and I have done so twice, and one sees well-dressed, prosperous people walking around the streets with their mobile phones and the latest fashions and all the top Western brands and malls in Chinese cities like Beijing and Shanghai, one could be forgiven for thinking that their country is at peace. And yet we know that in the far west of the country, there is a Turkic Islamic people called the Uyghurs who are being forcibly integrated into mainstream Chinese society. And those who don't, or those who don't agree, are being put into what in China are known as Laogais, prison camps. So is uniformity peace. Today, the coronavirus that has devastated our world has also ensured a form of peace. But again, it's the peace of fear, or what I call the peace of the tomb. No one knows where this little enemy may strike and at whom. Politicians show their ignorance, while scientists urge caution. The world of labor has collapsed. Businesses have failed. Professionals have taken a huge cut in their income. I think your teaching staff may agree with me, the only group of people who perhaps have not suffered too much of a cut in their income are teachers, because we are still teaching somehow. The whole world is waiting with bated breath for the magic bullet of the cure. But curiously, this piece of fear has had one interestingly beneficial effect in the improvement of the environment. Yesterday, I saw a program about Guwahati Zoo. Guwahati Zoo is just like any other zoo, and I loathe zoos. But it seems that without the crowds of people poking and prodding them, several rare breeds in the Guwahati Zoo have actually had felt time and relaxed enough to breed. Even a baby hippo, all the way from Africa and Guwahati Zoo. Tigers, the rare golden langur. So it's odd that there has been a sort of peace, and that has given the environment a rest. But the point is, can we go on like this? The world has to generate wealth. People have to work. So then how can we have peace? Can we have peace that is inclusive and allows for a variety of opinions? Can we take a certain amount of disorder and still allow for peace? In the end, democracy offers the best guarantee of peace. Democracy is noisy, messy, clamorous, and often angry and quarrelsome. But the ability of a democratic state to manage for people to live together in the midst of this chaos, maybe that's the closest we come to peace. Perhaps we need to look at the advanced liberal democracies, and I am not referring to UK and USA. Look at Canada, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and for that matter, New Zealand, and to a lesser extent Australia. These are societies where someone, somewhere, is always protesting, arguments happen, newspapers print huge differences of opinion. Yet, those countries are considered at peace and, in fact, are now favorite targets for immigration for this very reason. Why is this so? Why is this? This is because they are ultimately societies that allow for variety, for dissent, for individual choices, and they are inclusive societies. Rally or protest for the rights of women, minorities, special children, LGBT, Native Americans, you call it. But that does not take away from the fact that these are societies at peace. It's rather like a family. You have arguments, but you stay together. Protesters are not dubbed anti-national, unpatriotic, as they are increasingly labeled in India. We are a democracy, but we are increasingly an illiberal democracy. Wars are invariably born out when someone, somewhere, be it a government, a group, a community, is resentful, angry, feels victimized, or feel it has the right to dominate others, or feel that certain people don't belong. This is where our schools come in. Beyond the skills of reading, writing, and counting, schools must help our children to understand, to accept differences, to share, and to develop a passionate desire for a more just and inclusive society. And in this connection, I salute your school for taking this initiative. I think I will request my school to do this as well. Since this is a day designated by the United Nations, I will quote the Secretary General of the UNO, Antonio Guterres, on the Day of Non-Violence, which is 2nd October. And I don't have to tell you the importance of that date. For peace is intimately tied with non-violence. And I really don't know whether we should have separate days for peace and non-violence. Personally, I think we can have 2 days, 21st of September and 2nd October, both for peace and non-violence, because one is impossible without the other. Here is Antonio Guterres, right? In today's turbulent times, violence takes many forms. The destructive impact of the climate emergency, to the devastation caused by armed conflict, from the indignities of poverty, to the brutalizing effect of hate speech. He has called for a ban to protect religious sites and has called on the members to develop the sustainable development goals of the UN. And he remarked, and here I am going to mention Gandhiji. Gandhi's vision and philosophy are the pillars of the work of the United Nations. And he mentioned Gandhi's great ability to see the interconnectedness of all things. And so, in my closing remarks, I will end with the first lines of the Constitution of UNESCO, the organization which has done so much to further peaceful collaboration in so many spheres. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. This sentence is engraved in 18 languages. And for you students, I have a message from a song that was composed for a youth retreat in 1955. Some of you may know it or you may sing it. It's called Let There Be Peace on Earth and Let It Begin with Me. Finally, a prayer from the Upanishads. I'm sure some of you know it in Sanskrit, and I hope you will pardon my pronunciation. I'm sure you know it. It's called Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahana Yamkar Veer Vavahe, Tejasvi Nava Hitamastu, Ma Vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti. May we all be protected. May we all be nourished. May we work together with great energy. May our intellect be sharpened. Let there be no animosity among us. Peace in me, peace in nature, peace in divine forces. Thank you, and may you have a fruitful and peaceful day.
Thank you so much, Doita ma'am. I think I probably expressed the feelings of all who've had this opportunity to listen to this address. You
I
have
hope so.
given us so much food for thought. We do have a few minutes more of Doita ma'am's time. So if anybody has any questions, I will request you to please type them into the chat box, and I will request our Dean of Arts, Ms. Priyadarshini Guha, to please moderate the questions. In the meantime, I just thought I'll make a very brief summary. I mean, it's like lighting a candle to the sun, but nevertheless, I'll make a feeble attempt to summarize this absolutely brilliant talk. So, first of all, I think Doita ma'am helped us to understand what is the concept of peace. Peace is not only the absence of war. Peace goes way beyond that. Then she went on to raise certain very important questions. Does peace necessarily mean uniformity? Does peace necessarily imply conformity? Or can peace coexist with dissent? I think these are extremely important questions, particularly for the youth of today, in the India of today. Also, Doita ma'am raised this very important question, that is peace merely the fear of the tomb? How beautifully she expressed the fear that is there in the world today. Is that the true meaning of peace? Doita ma'am then went on to mention, very importantly, again, a very important message for the young people of today. Peace necessarily means inclusiveness. Peace necessarily means there has to be dissent, there has to be protest, there can be arguments. These are not equivalent to being anti-national, as certain forces would have us believe. In fact, it is war that begins in the minds of men, because peace involves the interconnectedness of all things. So these are some of the key points to begin with. Of course, there is so much more that Doita ma'am mentioned, but it's over to you, Priyadarshini ma'am, because I can see that questions are coming up. I'll request you to please pick up some of the questions, and please, if you could read them out for Doita ma'am.
Thank you, Mrs. Prasad. Doita, I'll take the first question. It comes from Brinda Banerjee. She's in grade 11. She
Okay.
asks, is peace and conflict then, according to you, dichotomous in our lives or synonymous in the sense that we can never truly have one without the other? What then would you consider true peace?
I consider true peace where conflict can be managed and is accepted by the society. Because let's face it, look at a family, right? We all have happy families. But in which family isn't there some tension or the other at some point or the other? Children fight, parents fight, there are problems, right? And yet, sometimes those problems face break up families. On the other hand, the family that manages its conflict, that appreciates that within the family there are differences of opinion, that family survives. So I think it's a question of managing conflict and allowing for expression of opinions. And that's the most important thing. To me, Churchill said democracy is the least worst form. And to some extent, I agree, right? It's probably not the best form,
Mhm.
but without it, just think what we would have, right?
Uh, I'll take the next question, Doita. Sharanya Fukan from class grade A 11 again asks,
Yes.
could you please talk briefly about the disintegration of Yugoslavia and the correlation of peace? Are they still in peace?
Right. Now, interesting that you should mention that because I've been to Yugoslavia when it was a communist country, when it was at peace, and I found it a very depressing country. And I've been there after the civil war. What happened was that, again, it's a bit like Pakistan. In Pakistan, you took 3 or 4 groups of people who cordially hated each other, and because they happened to be Muslim, you lumped them together and made it into a country called Pakistan. Now, basically, that's what happened with Yugoslavia. You took a group of people who actually didn't like each other very much, the Serbs, the Croats, the Slovenes, and you dumped them into this state where the Serbs began to dominate over the others. And as long as it was a communist dictatorship under Marshal Tito, somehow it survived as a state. As soon as Tito's strong hand was removed, it just broke apart in a very bloody civil war. And if some of you are interested, you might like to read a lovely book by a girl called Zlata Filipovic. You can say she's the Serbian and the Anne Frank of the Yugoslav wars. She wrote a book called Zlata's Diary, where she recounts living in Sarajevo, which was directly and every day being shelled by the Serbs from the hills around. And it has little things like today X went out to get water and died. Today Mama died. And it gives you an idea of how the Serbs, who were both Muslims and Christians, who had lived together in some sort of uneasy peace, then turned on each other. And today we are back to the pre World War states: Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, etc.
Thank you so much, Doita. One of our colleagues asks,
Mhm. Mhm.
ma'am, as you said, India is becoming a democracy, which is
Illiberal.
increasingly becoming illiberal. What
Yes.
then do you think is the future of our country?
I think the future of our country depends very much on the youth of our country. And it distresses me
Absolutely.
when I see youth taking part in riots which call for X as unnatural, which support newspapers and TV hosts who talk of people as the other. There is actually a, a TV channel which has mentioned the fact that more Muslims are getting into the IAS, and good luck to them, as a sort of jihad, where inter-community and intercaste marriages are condemned and even killed. And who are taking part in these children? It's the young people. So the future of India rests with you. We've made a royal mess of it. I cannot remember growing up in Calcutta wondering who ate what. I can't remember this. People ate. In fact, a lot of people went to Nizam's where they ate beef kebabs and kept quiet about it.
Exactly.
Right? I can remember. And today, oh my goodness, right? What you eat defines you. People are getting killed for the mere task of transporting cows. And this is ultimately a high caste Hindu movement. We need to be much more inclusive than that. We need to get over these labels. And it rests with the youth of India. Thank you.
Um, and connecting exactly to what you just said, Doita, there's a child who says, Anushka, that, ma'am, I wanted to ask you, then does a peaceful mind contribute in maintaining external peace?
Yes, that's a very good question. A peaceful and balanced mind certainly contributes to a peaceful society. But that peaceful mind doesn't mean that you accept everything. Gandhi, for example, now again I'm calling Gandhi and I know, oh God, she's going to talk about him again. Gandhi had a very peaceful mind, but he hated the sin, but not the sinner. A very interesting thing that when the present queen, she was Princess Elizabeth, got married, Gandhi actually wove a length of khadi for her as a wedding present. And that tells us that he had no hatred against the British. He hated the evil of rule, of British rule. Right? The fact that he died with the name of God on his lips tells us something. Thank you. That was an excellent question.
Another colleague asks, how far do you believe that the mainstream news channels are threatening peace in India?
I think the mainstream news channels are one among many things that are threatening the peace of India. Right? I would not call them a main cause because they basically reflect what people are thinking. But the fatal lure of the TRP, right? And the fact that and they are also controlled by corporates, never forget that, right? Leads them to positions which are very often inimical to peace, I would say, right? Where they should be spreading caution, they ramp up the feelings. And by the way, it's almost like, history repeats itself. Um, First time as tragedy, the next time as farce, as Marx said. Before World War One, that so-called peace was constantly interrupted by the feverish and ugly newspaper coverage of those days. Right? For example, when the British government at one point decided to do something a little sensible and cut down the number of battleships because it was engaged in this amazing level of naval rivalry with Germany, the people protested. They protested on the street saying, we want 8 and we won't wait, meaning we want 8 more battleships. And all this was stoked up by the newspapers of the day. Even Sherlock Holmes fell prey to it. There are a couple of stories of Sherlock Holmes, which if you are interested, you might read, right? Where certain naval plans have been stolen by a European power, which is
Yeah,
not named, but you know who he is because he's got a name like Von something
on
or the other,
something.
and he has a Dachshund dog. So, you know who it is. So I'm afraid a similar thing is going on, and it's worse because 24-hour channels are constantly beaming all this stuff into our homes.
The next question comes from Moinak. He's in grade 12. He
Mhm.
says that, why does the term peace hold relevance only when it's preached by the powerful countries? Why are smaller nations neglected as weak when they talk about peace? Take, for instance, India during the Indochina War. We preached peace, and the world took us to be weak, and China capitalized on that.
True, true. But actually, though we did peace, we did speak peace, we also, and I have to tell you, because we are 40, 50 years after that conflict, we also contributed to aggressive actions which led to the conflict. We put up what is known as the forward policy of putting up forward posts beyond the line of control. So we did speak peace, yes, but behind that we also did other things, right? But today, for example, look at the names of the countries I mentioned. They are truly peaceful countries, and they manage to, you know, manage social tensions within them, right? In Norway, for example, had the most terrible massacre when a white supremacist opened fire and killed 70 young people at a young people gathering. But instead of the country breaking apart, the government, the king, the people, they united in abhorrence of this man. The same thing we saw in New Zealand, right? Whereas after 9/11, there were actually people in America who said that, perhaps America deserved what she got. There were others who said it is a conspiracy, right? So it's a question of having to manage your tensions, right? I hope I've answered it. Small countries are not considered weak. Certainly today, these countries can be held up as exemplars of peace.
Maybe this is the second last question, though I know you
Okay.
have class.
Yeah.
Ambika Roy Chaudhary from grade 11 asks, do you think that if a protest turns violent, it loses its validity? Or are violent protests justified in some cases?
Excellent question. I think if a protest turns violent, it loses its validity. I don't think violent protests are justified for any reason at all. But again, it's a question of who starts the violence also.
The
In our
last
country,
question, oh,
can I,
sorry.
can I just, in our
Yeah,
country, we are watching even non-violence protest is being crushed by the violence of the state in clear violation of our fundamental rights under Article 19, the right to assemble peacefully and without arms.
in
Thank
fact, I mean, to add to what you just said, Dvita, I saw these clippings just last evening where, we all know that the farm bills have been ramrolled in through parliament. And there were
That's
these
right.
scenes at the Rajya Sabha, which,
Yes.
just showed that if the way the voice of the opposition party was being crushed. So, I mean, where do we stand?
Where do we stand? But the fact is that the opposition also has shown its weakness by behaving like this. The thing to do is go to the people and say these bills are against the agricultural sector, right? In this connection, I must tell you, I saw an interesting exercise the other day. A teacher was teaching a class in civics, and she said, "Today we are going to have a mock parliament, and you are going to behave as if you are in parliament."
Oh,
And you know what
goodness.
happened? The students started fighting with each other. So I guess our right, instead of sitting down and presenting and saying, okay, I'm going to be
Yeah.
for the motion and opposition and government, they actually started throwing things at each other.
You can't blame them. They're just
Yes,
copying what they
yes,
see.
exactly. So, as they say, right, our leaders are giving us an excellent example.
Yes. I'll take
Oh,
the last two
okay.
questions.
Hmm.
Shomudeep asks,
Hmm.
isn't peace morally a state of mind? How
Yes.
relative is it to each and every person? For example, peace for a person in Syria may be having food and shelter to survive, while
Hmm.
peace for a person living in the United States would be different. The so called peace among nations, do you think, are actually only standard rules and agreements?
An excellent, this is a very, very tough question. I must say it's the toughest one. Yes, peace may feel very different to where you are. For a person in Syria, it may be, yes, just surviving for the next day, getting something to eat, and not being bombed every day. Whereas peace for someone in America may be something totally different. Again, in America, whether you are a black person or a minority or an LGBT person or a white person, peace can mean very different things. But in the end, right, after all, countries are aggregations of people. And the idea of peaceful transition, peaceful development has to spread in every one of us. That's why I said, let there be peace on earth, but let it begin with me, right? It has to begin with us. That's why I said that in places like these countries that I mentioned, right? The countries unite. They are united in the idea that peace must be maintained, that nothing should disrupt peace.
The
Ma'am,
last question,
may I just add in here that we all talk of human rights. We should all stress on human responsibilities also, ma'am.
You are absolutely right. That's why I said, let it begin with me. It's not just human rights, it's human responsibilities. I couldn't have put it better. I
um,
couldn't have put it better.
I think what we tend to forget, even in the classroom, Doita, you'll agree, is that we don't stress so much on the fundamental duties that we as citizens have.
That's right.
We
Yes.
only talk of our rights and how
All
they
right.
are being violated.
Violated. Quite true.
The last one, Doita, it's a very interesting one. I mean, you could take it as tongue in cheek, or you could take it as something extremely philosophical. I don't know which way it could go. Uh, Sankalp asks, do you think everyone who dies rests in peace?
That's a philosophical one. I can't
Yes.
answer it. I would say I hope they do, right? But I always wonder that when we, when we remark that someone dies, we say he left for his heavenly abode, right? Or as we say in Bengali, "সে পরলোক গমন করিয়াছে." Now I always wonder, how do they know whether they are going up or down?
Agreed. Absolutely.
Okay,
Um,
so
uh, so
I'm
I think
thinking.
it's sad, but we'll call it a day.
Priyadarshini,
So, yes, Mrs.
Priyadarshini
Prasad.
ma'am, I'm just going to request, Doita, I think you skipped one question, which I
Which one
Okay,
is
think,
that?
instead of ending on this sort
okay,
of different note, if we
yeah.
can go back to the topic that was really the core of Doita's lecture today. Will non-violence most
Oh,
certainly lead to a greater level of peace? Mohor Banerjee of class 11 asked this question, and I think since Doita beautifully put it in her lecture, that there are these two dates, 21st September and 2nd October, and they are both so inextricably interlinked. So, Doita, may I just request you to sum up with, an answer to Mohor's question?
Yes, I think so. Well, that's the core of what I said. Yes, peace cannot be without nonviolence. I know that at some stage to achieve peace, we had to go to war in Second World War. Yes, but when we talk of real peace, peace between people, peace in societies, right, we have to look at nonviolence. There is no other way. There is no other way. And we have seen how in 1989, and I was privileged to watch this on television, that the countries of Eastern Europe, by peaceful means, threw off a stifling dictatorship. And as Václav Havel, president of Czechoslovakia, put it, right, in what came to be known as the Velvet Revolution, because it was so peaceful, he said, people, we have given the government back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is so beautifully said. And just like you quoted the constitution of the UNESCO, Doita, so beautifully put that war begins in the minds of men.
Yes.
I think it would be fair to say that likewise, peace will also begin in the
Begin.
minds of
Right,
our
so
young ones.
that's right.
So I think on behalf of the students and teachers of Indus Valley
Thank you.
World School, I want to really thank you for giving us such a beautiful beginning to this day. So much to think about.
Thank
You brought in from the UNESCO to the Secretary General of the United Nations to the Upanishads. I mean, everyone, and across the centuries you traversed so
thank
beautifully and so seamlessly. And I think it has been a truly mind blowing experience for us to listen to
I
you.
think no, no, not at all.
And all I can say is, Doita, please, please come back again. Uh, Give us more opportunities for our teachers and students to listen to
Sure.
you. And maybe please request you to promise that you will, agree to do this
I
with
would
us over and over again.
certainly, and I would love to come to your school once
Please,
this crisis is over. I'd love to visit the
absolutely,
school. I love
absolutely.
visiting schools.
Thank you
Okay,
so much
thank you.
once again. And students, I'm sure you will have lots of things to think about, lots of things to discuss. Let it carry on in your classes for today.
Yes,
Uh,
what to do?
take this take this theme forward. Discuss it with your families. Discuss it, and let it be the beginning of a movement. Because this is what we want. We want
Yeah,
peace to pervade. And have a beautiful day, all of
yeah.
you. Doita, have a beautiful day
Thank
for
you.
the and
Thank you.
thank you once again.
Not
Thank you
at all.
so much.
Not at all. I'm leaving the class now, and thank you so much. All the best. All the best to the young people